If you're watching this video, you most likely have a pretty good idea of what Titanfall 2 is. You could compare it to any hero's journey from media, where a chosen one goes on a quest to save what they care about. It's easier to say that Titanfall 2 did for Respawn what Titanfall 1 did for Aaron Paul if Titanfall 1 was Breaking Bad.
I'm learning how badass Xbox One is. Xbox, go to Titanfall. Picking you. I like you. Oh, it's happening. I'm gonna go kill some Titans. Oh! Oh no. Uh-oh. Oh yeah, I'm getting out of here. I think I just died again.
It's probably one of my favorite advertisements ever. Anyway, it's two tales as old as time. The hero's journey is the first, and the second is a fantastic FPS comes out. The player base dwindles due to time and competition, and the campaign fades into obscurity except as a fond memory for admirers and enthusiasts of the game, stuck in the past, or seeking a more complete single-player campaign as opposed to what a lot of AAA offerings are nowadays, with a few exceptions, of course. We're going to go back and look at this to see if it holds up as well today as it did back then, just as an overall journey through the campaign. Everything with Titanfall begins with land, and Titanfall 2 mirrors this sentiment throughout the game on who has what claim to a specific piece of land and who's justified, similar to another conflict going on in the world currently. Though our story is open-ended, there's still quite a few structures we'll follow throughout as the writers intended. This all begins with the frontier, a utopia, and the dreams of an unlikely grunt. Instead of marveling over the spectacle of the most sought-after location in the universe, the frontier, Rifleman Jack Cooper instead fixates on the beauty and strength of the modern-day pilot. In the opening, he doesn't focus on the PTSD experiences or any of the horrors of the frontier war, but instead on the glory and admiration he has for pilots and how they control the battlefield through superior physical prowess, mastery of equipment, and of course the giant metal robots that carry the team in any conflict they encounter. He phrases it best that a pilot at their peak, matched with their ironclad ally, can only be stopped by an overwhelming force or an equal in the opening. This is implied to be other pilots with their Titans, but throughout the game, I'll leave you to decide where the line of overwhelming force is drawn. Cooper laments over the war and how it goes back and forth between two factions, and how at the end of the day, he will always serve the Frontier Militia. The game paints both the Frontier Militia and the IMC, the Interstellar Manufacturing Corporation, as black and white evil empire versus good guy rebels, but it's a little more complicated than that, though the game doesn't really ever expand on the Interstellar Manufacturing Corporation in the game, as realistically speaking, this is a propaganda piece for the Frontier Militia. We'll talk about each side as we run into them a little more. We're here with Ty Lastimosa, our mentor who sees beyond our status of being a grunt. We're greeted with a familiar sight doing the classic FPS camera tutorial with lights to sync the training simulation we're about to hop into. Halo did the same thing, but I like it because it's world building and also serves a functional purpose in the gameplay and helps characterize the technology inside the Titans a little bit. Lastimosa, as you heard earlier, knows he shouldn't be training us, but due to the war at hand, there's also very little gained by not having us trained to use Titans. The Frontier Militia is a faction that's held up by the people within it as opposed to the resources they have behind them. Talent and skill is a limited resource, and Lastimosa knows this, which is why he believes in the potential Jack can possibly bring to the cause. He walks us through the jump kit, which is essentially the definition of the pilot's parkour skills to allow them to do the unthinkable on the battlefield. He very much undersells this, since it's not clear what other characters can do with the jump kit. The only possible metaphor is him just referring to the movement tech of the game, but Titanfall has the advantage of it being easier than ever to very quickly learn the movement. It's just difficult to have overall mastery. What makes jump kit mastery difficult is being able to both execute people and sick moves all at once. Most importantly though, we get a glimpse into Lastimosa's mindset on why he is even in the war. The training simulation is based on a very zen iPhone presentation aesthetic. And I mean iPhone presentation in a good way despite not owning one. Harmony seems to be what every spacefaring citizen desires. A planet at peace with itself, untainted through the corruption of mechanical warfare. And most importantly, it's just a place for honest people to live. Lastimosa knows that people are the best resource for taking back the frontier, and he believes in the militia with how it's been progressing through the war, especially since the Battle of Demeter. So let's talk about the Battle of Demeter. This was well before my time in the frontier, but this event largely shaped the conflict into escalating to the point it's at in Titanfall 2. Demeter is the result of land conflict once again. The frontier began with the IMC, who is basically an industry giant that owes its success largely to the mining of other planets. IMC does stand for Interstellar Manufacturing Corporation, after all, so it makes sense. They discovered the frontier and provided land and money to veterans in their industry to settle down on these planets. The IMC lost interest in the frontier for years until they realized that's a ton of money and potential profits and resources they could be gaining by capitalizing on it. As a result, they declared eminent domain. The citizens of the frontier wished to keep their autonomy anyway, and as a result, the advent of both the Titan and the Frontier Wars were born. Now, the Battle of Demeter is very much like Pearl Harbor in the sense that it's an event that forever changed a war and also led to the evolution of weapons used in wars forever to come. Spectres, Ticks, Reapers, and Stalkers were all automatons created for the war to make up for the IMC's lost manpower. To explain what happened in a sentence, the militia severely damaged the IMC. The IMC had many people defect and change the powers in the war from being rebels against tyrants to two fully fleshed out factions or leviathans at war. Leviathan being the thing from Hobbes with like an absolute monarchy. That's not equivalent here. I just mean two big groups. The point Lastimosa makes by mentioning this conflict is how this has cemented for him, just like many others, that the war is winnable by the militia, since the IMC has been forced to rely more so on mechanical men and mercenaries as opposed to the human quality of soldier and grunt that they were initially structured under. There's still grunts and human soldiers in the IMC. I mean, they're the most common enemy in the game. It's just this like consistent outsourcing being used to bolster their ranks. Lastimosa sees more so as a weakness. It's quality versus quantity. I consider the events around the Battle of Demeter a bit of a forgotten golden age in terms of the technology, since this is when the Ogre Titan had prominence, who unfortunately has aged out by the time Titanfall 2 takes place, with how they handle the Titans and their naming conventions and their kits now. Regardless of the nostalgia, this event changed the war for a lot of people, and was essentially the birth of full breakout war as opposed to minor targeted attacks between factions. And the militia won here without a doubt, which is why Lastimosa credits their superior tactics and focus on people to their victory. Back to the mission at hand. I tried my luck at using some of the provided weapons to see how much of my FPS skills I've still retained since making a Back 4 Blood video. Just a slight warm-up. Lastimosa shows off the pilot's Gauntlet, which is essentially the mandated speedrun and badge of honor for any pilot to show their mastery of the jump kit and of their own assassination skills in motion. Run 1 goes pretty bad. We have the par time, which is great, but everything else was not great. Missed shots are rampant. I ran on foot instead of utilizing the jump kit, and overall, to put it bluntly, it was boots on the ground grunt gameplay. Run 2 went 6 seconds better, but I also ran past some of the grunts, though I did a better job on focusing my fire using an assault rifle. Run 3 got delayed because I wasn't happy with my starts in it, though I was using the Alternator, a fantastic SMG, and one of my favorite weapons from both Titanfall and the spin-off Apex Legends, or Apeset's legs, depending on where you're from. Run 3 started for real once I used the R201, a great all-around weapon. That was my best run yet, with a 47-second mark to rep my PB. It set the game's difficulty to hard, but since I'm making this my canon interpretation of events, I set that shit to master and let Lastimosa know I was ready to go. Now, before I continue with Lastimosa, I want to make a note here. All of the weapons in Titanfall 2 are great and fun, and I would highly recommend you play the game, or at the very least check it out by the time you've seen this video. I'm not really going to linger on how all the weapons work, since I think it's a lot easier to see and explain that through like actual multiplayer usage, since that tends to be where you can get the most mileage out of them. But within the campaign itself, they're all fun and playable, and I would highly recommend the gunplay of this game. I'm not going to say it's the best gunplay on the market currently, but I will say that it hasn't aged a day in terms of the actual fun factor with the shooting and the movement. So if you're looking for a movement shooter, but you can't play Splitgate anymore, I would highly recommend checking out Titanfall 2. Moving on, Lastimosa showed off BT, a Vanguard-class Titan and the pinnacle of frontier militia engineering in terms of raw scope and with the actual production quality. Before we're able to simulate calling our own Titan, the simulation freaks out due to the fact we're under attack and it's time to hop on a new planet, the planet Typhon, backing Lastimosa and BT. Before we continue, I do think it's interesting that we never get to see Jack Cooper's Titan that he calls in the simulation. It makes me wonder whether or not it would have been the same model as some of the other Titans present in the game, or what framework it would have fit. Realistically, it's just another Vanguard-class Titan, so it would have just been BT, but maybe a different color. But it's fun to think about. This is where the pilot's gauntlet actually begins. While we're falling down the Earth, we can actually hear the militia freaking out about having their last moments inside of a floating coffin. And coincidentally, that's essentially our method of travel down to the planet's surface. Our drop pod drugs us up, and then this is where the real pilot's test comes in. You see, pilots have the benefit of having a vast amount of technology in terms of their weaponry, their Titan companion, and more specifically their movement. Being able to wall run, double jump, cloak, stim, grapple, whatever other gimmick of your choice you pick that they have at their disposal tends to make combat with regular grunt units trivial. For the regular rifleman, this is not the case. This initial landing made me second guess having the difficulty on mats solely because I was hesitant as to whether I'd be able to make it through the first level without all of the shiny perks that being a pilot provides. This first encounter consisted of one IMC Spectre Brigade, which had me and all of my comrades pinned. Spectres are unique in the Titanfall universe as they're the most humanoid in terms of function. Spectres, as well as Stalkers, are essentially miniature Titans or robotics, automatons, with their sole purpose being to serve as a substitute for infantry, while at the same time outperforming the traditional soldier. They mirror and improve upon Full Metal Panic's implementation of the idea. Full Metal Panic showed off the Plan 1-11 Alastor in one of their 2004 novels, and I also believe it's in their Season 4 adaptation, Visible Victory. It's essentially the original mechanical soldier advertised for war. Full Metal Panic is, of course, a military thriller with mech escapades with a dash of high school slice-of-life romance. It's all fantastic, so I'd suggest watching it if you haven't seen it already. The Plan 1-11 Alastor is a ground infantry unit that is essentially what the Stalkers and Spectres most likely drew inspiration from in their overall design. They serve functionally the same purpose, the only difference being that the Plan 1-11 Alastor is far more agile and advanced than the Stalkers and Spectres present within Titanfall, though this can be accredited due to the Alastor units, despite being mass-produced, being far smaller in number compared to the hordes of Stalkers and Spectres produced for the War on the Frontier as essentially a replacement for the Army Grunt. This section, even though it looks just like a meat grinder and the only stimulation it has is war ASMR, is actually one of the better written in the game, especially since it gives you the feeling of being an expendable soldier, but by the same point, you can beat the odds, and I found a lot of the difficulty I had here was more so about my general approach. Lastimosa hears our cries and screams for help, and he says he'll make his way over. Right as he does, and we get a bit further ahead, we experience a Titanfall right in front of us, before Lastimosa and his Titan BT show up to give him a Titanfall 2 by throwing him as hard as they can. Lastimosa saves our life, and then goes back out there to solo the enemy team, just in time to get curb stomped. We're busy playing Sleepyhead Passion Pit, fading in and out of consciousness, but we get to see the enemy pilots for the entire game. The Apex Predators in all their glory. We get to see Richter take somebody's ear off to keep as a prize. I'm pretty sure that's a war crime. I'm assuming he would have scalped them if he could, but this game is for kids, so they had to censor it somehow. Blisk yells at him that they gotta make their delivery on time, and we wake up out of our passion pit to be mauled by wild animals. Okay, I'm gonna level with you guys. I really hate this villain introduction. I think it does a very poor job of characterizing anybody besides Blisk. I think his is fine, but everybody else's is just so generic, and most of the enemy pilots aren't even really present. The game does a very poor job of characterizing enemy pilots for the Apex Predators and the IMC. There's so little emphasis on them and their character outside of like minor Marvel-esque "I'm gonna kill you" quips, which I'm not a big fan of. I wish they put more effort into their own characterization, and there's little hints of that throughout the game. Like Richter, you don't know that's his name yet, but the ear collecting guy, he's doing something. But one thing that I thought was very much missing is that Apex Predators feeling like a team of mercenaries that have to cooperate to get their job done. This scene is probably the closest that comes to them working together outside of Sloan and Blisk having chemistry with how they work together. The best way I can think that this could have been done is if you look at Resident Evil 8 Village. I talk about Resident Evil a lot on this channel, even though I'm not covering nearly as much survival horror as I want to be right now. But that'll change. But beside the point, Resident Evil 8 Village has a great opening with their villains. Heisenberg kidnaps you, brings you before the court. You can see Moreau and that little creepy doll running around. They all argue about what to do with you until the big bad decides what's next. It's such a good characterization that lets you immediately be able to pick up on everybody and how they interact with each other. Now, of course, this was the only moment that happened in the entire game. There was very little group characterization outside of that, but the fact they even had that in one scene was really well done. And I think if they had something like that here, or them bickering, or just, I don't know, much of anything, I understand they're professionals, and that's okay, but they need to have a professional personality. And only one of the later pilots even has that, like, professional attitude during combat, or even in the game. I guess outside of Blisk. But the point is, there should have been a better way to introduce everybody, as opposed to just this random, "Are they all dead? Good, let's get moving." You know, it's such a shame and a missed opportunity for what they were working with. Lastimosa saves our life, just in time to break the structure present to hand over his Titan and all of his pilot stuff, so that there's a sole survivor of our mercenary massacre. Lastimosa has played Team Deathmatch for the last time, so we bury him accordingly. And then our hero's journey begins hunting down batteries for the Titan. Lastimosa's pilot suit, in accordance with Titanfall law, comes with a jump kit, the wall running, and the fancy overlay. In addition, he has the cloak ability, which allows us to turn temporarily invisible, giving us strategic advantage for cowardice and cruelty towards others. We start off just doing some basic wall running with our helmet calculating the best movement methods, which I tend to ignore throughout most of the playthrough, and just making our way through the wilderness. I find a pilot's helmet that I will not be delving into the lore of why a giant floating pilot helmet is left around, not just in this level, but in all of them, and I also didn't collect most of them. While we're making our way through, there's a lot of lore drops and yapping, so let's talk about one of the larger yappers in the game, General Martyr. He's your stereotypical pragmatic villain who wants to win the war at all costs. He's head of the research and development team of the Airy Science Division of the IMC, which also makes him a nerd and most of his combat opinions invalid. I'm not sure why he plays such a large role if he specializes in the Science Division, though I could be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. He's just wanting the remnant militia forces that survived the attack to turn themselves in here. In my commentary YouTuber opinion, he's an uninteresting character in an interesting world with a slightly deeper faction than what you would initially assume, but it's just not that much deeper. Some of the grunts illustrate that the chain of command is skewed, since currently the IMC is working with the Apex Predators, a mercenary faction who's taking control of their operations on the planet. Basically, the IMC military is at the disposal of a group of pilot mercenaries sent to assist with the battleground. All under the control of General Martyr, of course. Basically, the IMC military is at the disposal of a group of pilot mercenaries sent to assist with the battlefield, all under the control of General Martyr. They talk vaguely about a superweapon as well, but considering all the technology that the militia and the IMC have between themselves, you can safely classify just about anything as a superweapon, considering how giant weapons armed to the teeth have become a sense of normalcy on the frontier. For these first encounters, I utilize guerrilla warfare while waiting for my jump kit to sync up, and also because I'm a coward who doesn't like reviewing sections. I come across some drones as well as shooting what I believe to be plasma. That cells at making a clean hole through the brain throughout most of these encounters. Now, I'm still trying to get my FPS card back since admitting I played Valorant in the Back 4 Blood video, and I'm also trying to get back to putting so many hours into Back 4 Blood for that video. So it's an ever-shifting process throughout the game, getting used to strategic engagements. Just about all of these earlier encounters can be navigated just by shooting, cloaking when you're caught, and going back to long-range shooting or sneaking around and SMGing. We get our first glimpse into the militia's ideology here, with making a difference to protect the home that's been built up for generations since the Frontier's discovery, even though that was built on the foundation created by the IMC. It kind of all blends together as generic let's do good propaganda, but it's a little more encouraging than the surrender and we'll just arrest you instead of shooting you on sight. Some IMC grunts talk about hijacking BT, but luckily we brought a battery just in time for BT to let us know that he still needs more. We meet BT, who lets us know the fetch quest arc is not over yet, and he also provides clarity that if we turn ourselves in, we'll get murked, which I certainly will keep in mind throughout the mission. We run into some grunts who talk about the Apex Predator group employed by the IMC being invitation only, but I'm personally not too terribly impressed given some of the goofy guys in Apex Legends. We learned that BT has been linked to Lastimosa for years, which is rather sad, but he also understands the concept of friendship as a result. BT is unique to most mechanical companions in fiction, with how he has a sense and understanding of humanity, but lacking social norms, and also having a weird sense of honor and duty through his programming that goes beyond combat. He's most similar to aliens from the Bishop movie, if you're trying to make a direct comparison. It's hard to properly articulate, especially since you guys are just meeting him, and I have the foresight of beating the entire campaign, but you'll just have to trust me when I say he's unique in his view of the military mission in addition to his connections, despite not having ideology to any of what he does, or a direct stake in the war effort beyond his programming. We lay siege to a base a la one-man army by hiding behind rocks and sneaking around buildings that aren't properly staffed or insulated for the winter months. Master in Titanfall 2, I would say, is most similar to Legendary in Halo 3 or 4. Yeah, you'll for sure die, but it's nothing that feels comically impossible or punishing like that of Halo 2. I'd compare it to a Call of Duty campaign, but I've never actually finished one, so I couldn't tell you that much other than Kevin Spacey played the villain in Advanced Warfare. BT provides some context on one of the recordings we heard earlier, with the woman telling us about what we're fighting for being the commander of the Marauder Corps, Sarah Briggs. She's a decent leader who coordinated a not-so-decent charge onto this planet. We pick up the second battery and make our way back to BT. The only downside of a lot of these combat encounters on Master in open areas is that you can't really make use of the game's movement tech because you'll either get gunned down or it just doesn't feel like the structure is always there with how much damage the enemies do. We embark into our Titanfall 2, Link Evangelion style, and are told that above all else to uphold the mission. Now, starting out, BT is honestly kinda rough. Considering he's still turning on, there isn't much to do other than use bullet kinesis until our missiles charge up. Once BT recalls how to properly use his legs, this is where things get interesting. We come across our first Brute, who is the only Titan in the single player that didn't make it to the multiplayer, who almost ended us in our first encounter. Starting out for the first time with the Titan is like that performance Passion Pit did of Sleepyhead when they started and the drummer was just completely out of beat and the others were out of beat, making the initial performance kind of awkward and embarrassing, but the guys kept recording so they had to keep going. Though I do think it's important to note that this cover slaps, and I don't care who says it doesn't add anything, because the human experience certainly adds quite a bit to this. Anyway, our first Titan encounter just feels like we're the tempo being out of the beat, we barely survive it, and then we march out together with our newfound buddy and start our first real mission. I love Titanfall 2 a lot, I just have a few issues with this section. It's a little slow, it's very kind of boring in like repeat playthroughs. I wish it was more in like the effort of Far Cry with like surviving against the hostile planet, since Typhon to me seems like it should be a place that's really, really dangerous. There's grunts in the area and there's those yellow monsters that I can't remember the name of and a few rogue machines, and that's it. I wish it was more like the beginning of a Far Cry game where you have to be really cautious on how you approach these situations, since I feel like Even on the highest difficulty, there just isn't that much there to really make this segment memorable as getting your first wings as a Titan. But I guess that's what the next area is for, so I think I may just be being too critical. The journey's off. No more tutorial handholding or watching episodes of Bluey as a full-grown adult. We're on our way to meet up with Major Anderson to fulfill Lastimosa's mission. Before that, our fellow Wombats need some assistance, so it's time for us to go over what the Titans can really do. Up until this point, I haven't really focused much on the gameplay of the game. It's fantastic. That's really all you need to know, but that's also more so because I didn't want to talk about the Titan specifically until we were at parts that made a bit more sense to focus on the gameplay in. BT's default loadout is by far my favorite you can use in the campaign. BT has the bullet kinesis shield that allows him to block projectiles and shoot them back out, the ability to hold Q and then blast missiles at his opponents, in addition to electric smoke. The loadout is so perfectly adaptable in tandem with BT having 2 dashes to avoid enemy fire, along with an ultimate that is essentially just him shooting his gun a whole lot more, and his gun is good, so it's 2 points for the price of 1. Mastering combat in the Titan feels great, and you can even execute bosses when their health is low enough. The enemy Titans can even banter with you, even though Cooper only tends to talk to BT throughout the game, and they eventually all kind of blend together. It's still nice. You can actually use the loadout of all the Titans present in multiplayer as well, but for me, I just find it more thematic to stick with the one that BT had when Lastimosa first handed him over. I tried Tone for a little bit just to have some variety footage, but I am awful with Tone, and it just didn't feel right to me. There's just so much pressure that Expedition gives that I think the other loadouts lack. Anyway, we make our way to this water treatment facility, though I'm not sure whether it's water or toxic sewage given the color and the fact it damages you. I play around the arena, messing around with the executions. They're basically assassinations from Halo. You melee a guy from behind and a special animation plays of him getting whacked. They are insane. I would highly recommend you just look them up and go through all of them in your off time because they are very intense for executions. I miss when executions felt very visceral, but I guess that's why we have For Honor. I just wish For Honor was fun. With that done though, we kick off the button and BT lets us know we've got to split up. Immediately after, we get to meet Kane. Kane is on drugs. He hops on and off comm, trying to sound tough, and I think that his volatile nature is emphasized to try to focus on the idea that the Apex Predators are unstable mercenaries who are really there to just kill people and to make money. Kane, for me, though, isn't that terrible. Like, don't get me wrong, he's just straight up evil, but he's just kind of boring and generic. He really has a fucking sick pilot design, but you also never get to see it because he's always inside his Titan or talking on the intercom. I think he has the word evolve or die scratched onto his armor, which is awesome and metal, but we never really get to see any of that side of him. Honestly, I think that's one of the major flaws of the characters in Titanfall 2. They feel very underutilized. It doesn't feel like I'm trapped in a sewage plant with an insane drugged up pilot with a Titan based around burning the place down. It feels like I'm just running through a dungeon to kill a boss. It's smooth going through and taking out the stalkers and grunts. I'm not complaining. I think I'm just longing for something more. We get to meet some militia inside the plant who are busy having a camp out in their sea bear circle from all the stalkers. We help them take out a small brigade of them. The stalkers are so fucking cool with the way they run and shamble and fire rapidly after they're downed or crawl towards you. They feel so fucking designed with everything they do, and I honestly wish the humans had like half the animations these stalkers do, or just tried some of their tactics, since even though the humans do have pretty decent AI for the time, it never feels like they evolve past anything. But the stalkers, they just have so much more depth, and they explode if you shoot their back. In the area across from the militia as well, you can see these little stations that the stalkers emerge from. In later levels, you can even activate them first to have them be friendly. They're just a great designed enemy, and I'm happy they're present in the game. We do a bit of Call of Duty espionage through this pipe section, thanks to every spy's favorite weapon, a high caliber sniper rifle. Kane realizes halfway through the mission that somebody is halfway through killing all of his men, and is hoping for a real challenge compared to the unlucky pilot who came in without the militia's strongest Titan. We also have the advantage of most of the guns in the level being quite good, though I think that's more of a testament to the game's design, since I don't have any notes about any areas where I just hated using the guns. We'll talk more about pilot combat in the next chapter, but Titanfall 2 has the pleasure of not having any gun I just straight up hate, except using the EVA 5 automatic shotgun, depending on my mood, but I was raised a Mastiff kid. We make our way to the sludge deactivation chamber, and there's quite a few Marvins in this area. Marvins are janitorial units, and they're just silly little guys who don't do much besides stand around, and they also have their own faction in the Titanfall 2 multiplayer, which makes me wonder whether or not they want the Frontier. I choose to assume it's a joke, but I do think that it's reasonable for autonomous AI to hire their own pilots to fight for their stake and rights in the universe's biggest land war. We're also introduced to ticks here, which are walking grenades. They have little legs, and they charge out at you and then explode. I love ticks in the multiplayer, since I think it's a very silly idea to throw out a walking unit in the FPS, but it also gives me life actually killing somebody with them. In single player, I feel like so many show up all at once, it's kind of overwhelming, though I do like how they force you to use all of the movement you're given to survive. Believe it or not, there's actually a game that had some of the concepts from Titanfall 2, and the aesthetics that was fantastic and free. It was called Blacklight Retribution. It's been long dead for years, but the game had mech suits and the ability to summon your own bots and get other things with points accrued during the match. Food for thought, but this is a pretty underexplored idea in all modern shooters, so if somebody wants to make a Blacklight Retribution Titanfall mashup that revolves around summoning your own soldiers and robots and your own, like, titans, please do so. BT and I tagged and fragged a whole room full of grunts and made our way towards Kane. You can actually see the last pilot who got murked by Kane, which is a pretty cool detail. I didn't think much of it during my initial playthrough, but looking at the footage, it's a cool Easter egg, and I like the fact that his entire Titan is black, as a hint to the fact Kane uses a Scorch Titan, which specializes in heavy-duty fire damage. As we arrive, Kane just finished getting his double kill in a bot lane, and now we're facing off with him. He starts off with a single brute in the arena, and this is a very delicate dance of managing both your footing and the pillars in the arena. Kane's reliance on methamphetamines gives him constant tunnel vision, which gives BT and I the advantage of hopping between the pillars to confuse him and make him believe we're invisible. Though another detail about Kane, I like that there's a bunch of dead Titans here. This is very clearly a one-stop shop for getting your ride reverse pimped, and I think it makes more sense why Kane was so chill about you showing up and killing all of his guys. So the way Kane starts his opening dialogue with the emphasis on the Vanguard class Titan makes me think these were guys just like Squad Wombat who are pilots, but they're not particularly skilled like Lastimosa and BT were. The electric smoke here really helped with dealing with Kane when he would rush in, along with obscuring myself to trick him into thinking he was vaping. Right as Kane's health got in the execution territory, he decided to either die of old age or self-destruct. I'm not entirely sure why he chose to end things this way, or whether it was even scripted or not. Maybe he stood in his own fire, maybe it was supposed to, like, explode and kill me. But it was kind of an underwhelming end to the fight, since I honestly would have preferred to just get the execution on him. I honestly thought a second Titan would emerge from a wall or something as the real Kane, as like some sort of Easter egg, but it was nothing. We hijack Kane's sick-as-fuck helmet, and then hijack his not-so-sick-as-fuck radio. We overhear a new character, Sloan, starting the Dark Brotherhood questline, and then make our way with BT to the next stop.
In order to survive, we must keep moving.
Kane's appearance in the game is supposed to be that of like a Tuco or a Voss stand-in, and I don't really think it works at all, or at least not in the way that the developers intended. If you've seen Breaking Bad, you know who Tuco is. He's basically a drug kingpin who is crazy and unstable. And if you've played Far Cry 3, you know who Voss is. He is just crazy and unstable. I don't really like Kane's characterization in the game because I don't really think they make use of any of his crazy drugged up habits. He's not really that, like, conclusive to draw world building from outside of the Apex Predators being willing to hire somebody addicted to drugs who has done crime in the past. I just wish the game had, like, a better way to characterize him, and I think the level is just pretty good. It's fun, I remember everything from it really well, I could replay it any time. I just wish Kane was more interesting, but I don't really know how they could build that up through the level in a clear and concise way to sort of draw anticipation outside of him being like, yeah, I'm pumped to fight you. So while I'm not nuts about it, I can't think of a way they could have done it better. So that's all good. And I think he is by far the best Apex Predator armor design. I really wish there was like segments you could fight pilot v pilot for any of these boss fights. It's such a shame that you're always just stuck in the mechs fighting. Wouldn't it be so cool to be able to fight Kane on the ground at first and then he hops in his Tilet or vice versa? That'd just be such a great like way to segue the boss fight. As we continue our stroll with BT, the hunt for Major Anderson is becoming more and more similar to hunting down Slave Knight Gale through the Ring City. Together we come across a facility that we're going to have to navigate through on the path to finding the Major for Lastimosa's mission. Blisk and his cronies catch on pretty fast that Kane has finished raising for the last time, so Blisk informs Ash to stop our hero roleplay. While BT explains that Blisk is basically a hired terrorist, we come across aisles of Reapers chilling like Buzz Lightyears at this toy store. Reapers are basically miniature Titans, being larger than a Stalker, but obviously smaller than a full-fledged Titan. They're surprisingly mobile and tend to utilize plasma, and I believe were created as an answer to dealing with the malicious supply of endless infantry. The comparison that I immediately draw to these guys would be the Tachikomas present in Ghost in the Shell. They're autonomous spider tank combat vehicles that are closer in size to that of a sedan, but not enough to actually be comparable to a Titan or any heavy forces present inside of Ghost in the Shell. They're both made with military use in mind, but what separates the two groups is that Tachikomas have much more freedom of thought as opposed to a Reaper. I personally believe Reapers have some level of autonomous intelligence and are more so just lack the vocal functionality aspect or any personality due to there being no reason whatsoever, considering the IMC focuses more on mechanical units as opposed to biological ones. But I only have my own experience to back that up, along with the fact they seem to be more specialized in harming humans, makes me think that their protocols go beyond a simple routine. As BT takes us on our stroll, it's clear to see that trees are delivered throughout the facility, giving a hint to its true nature. Combat in the first section is mostly with ground troops, which makes combat with them inside of BT null, considering he's a giant war machine, versus private soldiers for a manufacturing corporation. We quickly dispatch a brute in order to make our way through the facility, and there's a bit of non-verbal storytelling going on. Mainly with the fact that these guys are armed to the teeth with grenades and various weapons. By this point, you probably have a good understanding that we're inside a military installation of some kind, and you're correct in that regard, though it is a little more nuanced than that. As we continue through the facility, we're met with more and more resistance from other Titans, which briefly turns the game into a cover shooter, given that in sheer number we're pretty overwhelmed with our odds. BT assures us that we can utilize the cargo lift to act as a shortcut through the rest of the facility. Upon activation of this shortcut, BT gets snagged by the first working claw machine I've ever seen, with Ash exclaiming that the intruder has been detected and we bolt after him. This interaction to me always has gave Ash more characterization to me than the other Apex Predators, solely because with Kane, all he did was sit in a room and throw thermite fire onto giant robots and then beat them to death. Ash, at the very least, has the strategic knowledge to understand that without a pilot's Titan, they're essentially just super soldiers, as opposed to super soldiers inside of giant mech suits that neurologically link them to each other. We make a crawl towards BT through the station's pipes, like a bad Ratatouille sequel. Following the pipes is easy, and all of this platforming does make me wonder how the regular ground troops get by or even begin to navigate a place such as this. One thing that I think Titanfall 2 sucks at as well is ground combat with other pilots, like I mentioned. Every time you face off with a pilot, you're both inside of your giant metal casket, and it sucks because I'd be really curious to see how a fight with one of these pilots on the ground would go in the campaign, even if it just amounts to a 2-second time to kill, and then you continue through the mission. An important piece of note here, though, is that Ash is a little different than other pilots in the campaign as well. She's a simulacrum, or maybe it's simulacrum, but I'm pretty sure it's simulacrum. Basically, they're robots with human minds in them. They're actually in the campaign as regular enemies. I just struggle to tell the difference between them and other machines, which hopefully doesn't make me a racist. Simulacrums are theorized to be stores for copies of a pilot's consciousness. For example, let's say canonically in the campaign, our organs get a few too many extra windows. The militia could take a copy of Cooper's consciousness, and upload it to a simulacrum frame so that Cooper would still be able to function as a soldier. It's kind of like Soma, but without all the weird, dark body horror imagery. Granted, you wouldn't have to be a pilot to be put into a simulacrum. Anybody could be. Ash is unique from other simulacrums in the fact she has a human face mask, unlike every other simulacrum in the game. This technology is used on both sides, and there's no real negative morality to the simulacrum, to my understanding. If there is, they did a poor job of expressing it, or it's just the same as Soma's. It's explored more in Apex Legends or Ape Sets Legs, with the title changing depending on your respect for the Titanfall without Titans Battle Royale. I'd suggest reading through their wiki pages for more information. Back to the actual game, Blisk and Ash talk about scrapping BT, and Blisk also chastises Ash for having fun in the facility while we're struggling to survive. I like how the characterization is consistent, with Ash having the theme of treating this place like a game, considering she picks BT up with a glorified claw machine to take him somewhere else as opposed to just killing him or dropping him into something that would destroy him. And she just lets us scurry around, making no attempt to stop us. We hop onto the assembly line and continue, and it's starting to become more clear as to what this facility is designed for, given all the weapons and giant platforms scattered about. The assembly line applies soil and then grass, which then provides giant platforms scattered about the facility. With the assembly line providing both soil and grass, the trees being at the start makes a lot more sense, and following the assembly line is a nightmare since I was trying to do some cool pilot rush style kills, which resulted in me being rushed by enemy fire. Most of the time spent following the assembly line was spent role-playing as a crate and shooting from behind cover without moving in a movement shooter. BT drops the bomb on what the facility actually is creating. It's an IKEA. The assembly line is creating miniature homes filled with everything you need for an IKEA showroom showcase, with the addition of real grass and soil. There's even bookshelves, fake windows, and lifeless mannequins to make the area feel more lived in. Into the Abyss is unironically one of my favorite levels in a shooter, due to the fact it allows you to fight in suburban living environments in the future. It's like that ending level in Halo Infinite. Nobody has played Halo Infinite's campaign, most likely, and I couldn't even find what I was talking about by searching Halo Infinite Civilian Shelter. But basically, it's this desert-ish room that's filled with houses to simulate fighting on Earth. It's a great set piece that the Banished set up to train their soldiers to fight Marines. There's also Nuketown, which I don't think needs an introduction, but basically, it's just a Call of Duty map fighting in suburbia. You see, men are made to fight, said the YouTuber in a video game video talking about Titanfall 2 in his house. And for that reason, giving people houses and such to fight in within video games helps give men enrichment. Suburbia shooter maps are basically the men equivalent of squeaky toys for your dog. We continue our guerrilla cover warfare crusade following the ever-increasing assembled homes until we come across Ash. She praises us for making it through the boring part of the level by just killing the same grunts over and over in a factory setting, and lets us know we have to go up. We make a disorienting vertical climb up the level before Ash invites us to hitch a ride to the final destination. There's a no Titan sign here that's basically the equivalent of a no dogs on the grass sign, and it makes me wonder what they were thinking about putting a sign here and whether or not a giant machine built for war would even respect it. Finally, we arrive at one of the best segments in the game, the IKEA showcase room. And it's not for buying furniture, it's for training infantry to kill in familiar environments on the frontier. It's similar to that episode of Clone Wars where the clones have to survive the simulations over and over. Militia soldiers emerge, which leads to the questions about how many militia soldiers have even been through these tests, and immediately, Spectres emerge, showcasing the test beginning. The militia guys are great company though, and take down the Spectres with less difficulty than I do. Unfortunately, it's about time for Chekhov's gun to fire with the emergence of the Reaper we saw in the beginning of the level. Considering that they're essentially anti-infantry units, the militia allies brought in this test never stood a chance. The Reapers make full use of the environment through their movement, along with utilizing ticks to flush me out of the different homes that I hide in for shelter. This is essentially the sci-fi combat encounter equivalent of Tom and Jerry, with how much house running and hiding I had to do in the attempt where I actually survived for longer than 15 seconds. I like how this is simultaneously a survival gauntlet, while at the same time serving as an optional stealth section, with the cloak ability and all the houses giving you the option to sneak through to the exit, as opposed to charging head first. Once the Reapers are down though, unfortunately, the section loses most of its challenge. There's plenty of supplies in all the houses, the groups aren't coordinated enough to really be a threat, and they don't make good use of the environment, so it's not that hard to just go through and leave. But for spectacle alone, it's one of my favorites in the game by far. Bliss pops in to tell Ash that she's wasting company time and money, and honestly, I agree. That simulation dome was a larger fumble than the adults who bought Among Us VR expecting adults to be the main player base. Ash decides to just blow up the complex with us inside of it, and during this she forgets to kill BT, which systematically may cost the IMC their entire campaign. BT busted free due to all of the explosions, and we make our way back to him to make our final escape. Fighting in the housing simulation on the ground was by far a more immersive experience, but fighting in the simulation as BT has so much novelty to it. It makes me sad because it gives me flashbacks to Gundam Evolution on that one map on the coast that makes you feel like a giant because on how small the buildings are. As we're making our way towards the final escape, Ash rushes us down with one of the more unique Titans in the game, the Ronin. Ronin Titans are basically anime enthusiasts with a real-life actual sword and also possess the ability to shift into another dimension temporarily to evade our attacks. The shotgun is just insult to injury, as you can tell from the footage that Ash does a great job killing us even without the shooting. The only way I managed to hijack the win was by avoiding Ash and putting as much distance between us during the fight as possible, except during the end with spamming the melee function because I really wanted to execute her for how quick she had been killing me. The audio was a little off in the scene, but it's actually kind of off in all of the executions, or at least from the way I heard it. Maybe it won't be in the video, but for how I heard it through my headphones, everything didn't quite make sense. Crushing Ash in BT's giant metal hand, though, helped me feel a little more whole. I stopped to look back on the remnants of the facility, since it is one of my favorite levels in the game, after all, and I can't help but feel a little sad that I haven't seen this whole simulation with real props more in shooters, or just in general. It's underutilized, and I like the realness that the Reaper reveal has in this game, with the whole Suburbia shootout turning into Five Nights at Freddy's 3, with trying to survive with no doors. On that note though, I hopped into BT and made my way out to the next level, ideally with no further shortcuts. I wasn't sure whether or not I'd mention this in the video, considering it's not really important to the actual Titanfall 2 plotline, but Ash comes back for Apex Legends to be a playable character in it. It makes more sense for Ash to come back as opposed to anybody else due to the fact she's just a simulacrum. You know, they could put it in a different body and then just re-upload her to continuously fight. But it makes me wonder whether or not it's nostalgia baiting. And is nostalgia baiting even a bad thing? I mean, dude, anytime they bring back the old Final Fantasy games and Final Fantasy XIV, I'm losing my mind. I flipped out when Ultros was a boss fight they added. But for Titanfall 2 being just like used as a recycling ground for Apex Legends, it feels bad, and it feels like they're trying to like get me to go towards this just because it has what I like. And yeah, that works most of the time, but I just wish that Titanfall as a universe was more standalone, if that makes sense. Final Fantasy is like a large, overarching, massive timeline and expansion with so many different characters and plot lines and entire universes. It's so much to explore, and Titanfall is very self-contained, and I think that's why it kind of weirds me out they brought Ash back. But I just wanted to have a little bit of my thoughts here, since I feel kind of weird about having nostalgia bait for Titanfall, even though I'd probably day one buy Titanfall 3, so I'm not really sure whether I'm the target demographic or maybe I'm not and I'm just being a little bizarre for being mildly annoyed they brought her back. I don't know. I like death being final, just in games and in media in general, and that's kind of been pushed to the side more a lot of the time to keep these engaging characters and stories that people enjoy. And that's okay too. Believe it or not, we're about to finally meet up with Major Anderson, and it only took us reaching the halfway point of the campaign to reach this destination. We arrive at the facility, but before we have time to quit, we have a flashback to a time when this facility was populated by working machines. This continues to happen, and BT explains.
Facility, and they appear to be causing a rift in time. I advise caution.
We even get to see General Martyr roleplaying as the rebellion out of the scene in A New Hope where they're talking about taking down the Empire. The present has the unique perk of hostile wildlife, while the past has the perk of being a research outpost in all of its glory. Even with Anderson being a veteran SRS pilot, I don't think his covert operations or any mission the pilots really go on can give them tangible experience for time distortion. I will say though, the IMC sure did know how to design a place. This reminds me of Wizard 101 with the level 40 world Dragonspire, letting you see flashbacks of how Dragonspire used to be before looking like something out of a death metal cover. I believe the dungeon was called the Grand Chasm. If you've played Wizard 101, you know what I'm talking about. I've always liked how video games let you see a place in all of its former glory or interact with the world through time travel. Final Fantasy XIV did the same thing with the Alexander raid questline, though I'm not going to spoil it here if you haven't done it for yourself, since I know some people play the game for the plot. BT goes on to talk about how he can detect his own data signature, which I don't understand why that doesn't disturb him more, given that he's basically detecting a ghost of himself. Imagine visiting a place where you can clearly detect your presence outside of yourself, where you see yourself on camera. It may just be because of his Titan programming, but to me this is some weird spatial anomaly horror SCP level stuff that I haven't seen capitalized on well in any game. With no sign of Major Anderson, we check out reception, and we're greeted to half of him, unfortunately. It's a shame he couldn't see how far we, a basic rifleman, traveled through hostile enemy territory just to see his corpse. With Anderson's death, he gets a free ticket to Valhalla while BT and I are stuck carrying forward with the mission. The briefing essentially explains that the militia detected the equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction popping off, and the resulting blast has been affecting the flow of time on Typhon in pockets, specifically in this facility. What's interesting here is that in the briefing, Sarah gives Anderson a device that should protect him from the distortions that was recovered from a previous operation. Outside of Titanfall 2, I don't know how the series handled various weaponizations of both time and space, but I think this was something that got looked over, especially considering the only thing remaining is Apex Legends or Ape Set's legs depending on where you're from, and instead of paramilitary thriller buddy duo like with Titanfall 2, we get Battle Royale, Montage, Hero Roster, Constant Conversations, Passion Pit. We're on the hunt for the device Anderson got from Operation Grizzly, and the very first room we end up in, our past self triggers the security bots that have aged rapidly after realizing the N64 is 28 years old. Just like Nintendo fans, these old models are volatile, and over the years they've gotten more vulnerable to anything shot at them in mass quantities. Now, what's interesting about us infiltrating the building in the present, with the time dilations, we're also simultaneously infiltrating it in the past. So these guys have no clue what's happening other than some random pilot is phasing in and out of existence in their building. Once we kill some IMC grunts, they now believe that this is a targeted attack to the IMC, making enemies of both the present and the past, and the future if you're counting the women and children of those stationed at the facility. With the device recovered from Anderson, we're free to conquer anybody from any place and time, as long as they're present at the facility at this one specific date, in this one specific place. With BT being able to talk to us across time, I feel like this just doesn't make sense and is really silly, and I like him, so it gets a pass, but it's just such a big plot hole in how the technology works. But anyway, the animals being held at the facility make a bit more sense as to why they're still in the area in the actual mission, which is cool, and why people would be stationed on Typhon, considering there's nothing really there besides the planet serving as a frontier battleground. I like that they add these details. It's world building without picking up a note that's a few paragraphs about how they captured something, poked it with a stick, and then it emerged to kill everyone. Killing the grunts is easy, but when you're a time-traveling super soldier, you tend to have a few advantages over the regular rifleman. This whole segment is really just a game showcasing creative ways between hopping across two different versions of the same map, but it doesn't feel forced in the story just for the setting and gameplay, which I like a lot. With the beast converging on you in the present, but the past is full of gunmen, That's good game design. I like that dichotomy of basing yourself in a room where you flip between time frames and picking how you enter and exit encounters to immediately go into the next, along with the depth it adds to platforming. Granted, I ended up stationing myself in the elevator for most of this specific room to finally get through it until I realized I could hop out at any time, but you can understand why I praise it for the methods I could have used. Now, back to the plot. Anderson discovered that the IMC have access to an ancient device that lets them distort both space and time, which is the fold weapon. Anderson breaks down that it's powered by something called the Ark. Now, this Ark is something that's beyond human design, and while the wiki says alien technology, this makes me wonder about another concept from Full Metal Panic. Full Metal Panic has individuals known as Whispered. Whispered are essentially gifted individuals who, because of them being born at a specific date and time and the circumstances surrounding their birth, they've been gifted with knowledge of creating specific black site technology. This enhanced all of their other knowledge in engineering and science, but here we're more so focusing on the concept of the conditions surrounding one's own birth or existence, gifting them with knowledge of technology outside of their own head. Sort of like collective unconscious. This is a really simplified version of it, and I don't want to spoil anything about Full Metal Panic, since once again my hope is with this video, either Titanfall 2 will get popularity again, or Full Metal Panic will get popularity again. But anyway, it's been my headcanon for this that the humans created the Ark, and it's having a similar effect to what Cooper has been experiencing in the level, seeing glimpses of the future, just with the humans who built the Ark seeing glimpses on how to build it from the future. Or there were unique circumstances surrounding the birth or creation of the Ark, with seeing flashes of how to build it due to it being in proximity, due to where it would eventually be set off. Sort of like PTSD, but before it happens. The Whispered and Full Metal Panic are just sort of a baseline idea on how I kind of think about the possibilities of the creation of the Ark worked. Since even with BT talking across space and time, I don't believe the technology to create the Ark could have happened without either intervention from the future in the minds of those who created the Ark in the past, since it's also implied to be very ancient. Let's step away from this train of thought for a second and go back to Anderson, who unfortunately the mission didn't end as planned for.
This damn thing was just a test. One of our own planets is next. They're going to hit Harmony, and they've moved up the timeline. I have to get this intel to Sarah. Hold it right there, pilot. I'm looking. That was Major Anderson's final recording.
On the note of a fellow soldier meeting an untimely demise, we head on out to BT and deal with both the past and the present with the old security, along with some friendly wildlife. This wasn't too bad, except entering the garage with two Titans both in the past and the present. Pilots, despite what marketing and propaganda would have you believe, are still just normal guys, and Titans meet all of the hype of marketing and propaganda and can easily crush all of Cooper's bones into frosted flakes. So even though this is the only 8-second Titan stealth section in the game, I think it's very nerve-wracking. Seeing the Ark detonate in the past is probably how the scientists felt at the Oppenheimer bomb test site, but I didn't watch that movie, so I'm just assuming. It's chaos with all of the Titan security and ships flying around, compared to how calm everything else in the graveyard of the research facility is in the present. BT's plan to scan the Ark in the middle of all of this is basically a total death wish, but he's our buddy, so we hear him out and do it anyway. In our fatal moment before the death of ourselves and BT, we get to see the effects of the fold weapon firsthand, with time being frozen as so many are close to death.
BT?
With the device from Operation Grizzly being broken, weirdly enough, the Garfield show would literally steal this exact sequence as part of one of their episodes. I did not make this up. I remember watching this. This scene in Titanfall, though, is one of my favorites, and yet also weirdly sad to me. Even though the IMC is the enemy at the end of the day, We're just soldiers fighting for powers that we don't entirely understand on trying to figure out fair land distribution. We're able to scan the Ark, and BT lets us know that we've successfully fulfilled Anderson's mission.
To destroy the militia planet of Harmony using the full-scale version of this weapon. Pilot Cooper, our journey is far from over. We must get this data to the fleet.
Let's talk fan theories about Jack Cooper and how he has all of his skills. This is something I saw brought up on the Reddit page a few times, and in some Titanfall discussion. How is Jack Cooper such an efficient pilot, given that he's nothing but a grunt at the beginning of the story? Well, there's a few reasons for this, and personally, I like the idea or lore theory that he could possibly be a whispered of some kind. I'm using whispered in the sense that it's a term I've already explained, and it makes more sense than he's actually a simulacrum and he doesn't know it, or it's all a big psyop and he's still in the simulation at the start of the game. I don't really like those two twists. I don't really think they fit well in the Titanfall universe. But I like the idea of Jack Cooper being such an adequate pilot as a result of the time dilations. But I don't really think that can make sense due to that being so specific to Typhon. If there were more ways to make that theory work, I'd love to hear them. But the other thing is that there is the possibility of Jack Cooper being a whispered solely because he is so naturally gifted in a field that revolves so much around personal skills and experience. And throughout the game and the story so far even, Jack Cooper has taken down multiple pilots who are far more experienced, that were far more skillful with their reputation. So I choose to think of it as it's a possibility that could be playing into the game and its story, but I also don't think the actual outline is there. If they ever made a Titanfall 3 and expanded upon that, I'd love to see it.
Pilot Cooper, Anderson is dead, but we can complete his mission if we can re-establish contact with the fleet. The interstellar beacon ahead will serve our needs.
Now, I will say that even though this whole video is basically me shilling Titanfall 2, this next part is my least favorite level. There's nothing wrong with the beacon, I just personally think it's a little too plain compared to everything else, so that's my YouTuber bias notice there for everyone. We arrive with BT being lucky enough to locate a beacon, and the enemy making their way to attack said beacon. We can hear Captain Cole's distress cry, and he's actually familiar with Jack Cooper prior to the events of Typhon. He also saw us with Lastimosa before we dropped on the ship.
Run them over. My 40-ton chassis can eliminate smaller enemies.
Those stalkers just kept on coming. We may not have lasted much longer. We're opening the blast doors. Come on in.
They let us into the control room, and honestly, this moment makes me feel like I'm doing the Lil Yachty walkout. All we did was take out some basic stalkers and one of the most powerful mechs in the campaign, but it just felt so epic walking up after doing so, like we're the coolest guy around. We have to go snag an arc tool in order to get that beacon back online, and luckily in the substation there's one guarded by hordes of old security systems. The soldiers here are hopeful to see a pilot, which is a nice touch with recognizing how crazy it is to see a soldier who can both pilot the most advanced machine on the frontier, in addition to being a one-man lone wolf killing squad. Granted, Captain Anderson also went lone wolf, and we saw how that turned out. The corridors here do a great job of demonstrating how effective stalkers can be even when facing off against somebody as experienced as a pilot. Everything feels just a little too tight and guarded, making the player feel as if this is very clearly not their turf. The movement still allows for us to keep our flow, it's just a different feeling of control that may be hard to explain if you haven't touched Titanfall. This power grid though is comically large, even for the IMC, for all intents and purposes. We successfully steal the arc tool, making this Marvin go into a depression, but now we have the gimmick of the level, allowing us the option to interact with machinery throughout this place. It's reminiscent of an old Wind Temple gimmick you'd see in some Legend of Zelda-like or some other old RPG, but the mechanic expands as we reach the beacon itself. It's funny how when we're about to go back to the militia, they're telling us how epic we are for doing a few wall jumps. To them, this has got to be the craziest movement they've ever seen, and they're just watching a guy who doesn't know how to do the wacky movement in the game. In universe, I couldn't tell you how we compare outside of the pilot's Gauntlet. I think the reason there's no NPC pilots doing parkour is because the devs didn't have time to add it. When we return, we've got to turn on the relays, which means sitting in a microwave and shooting everything as fast as possible. It's very easy though, and I think that section is a lot more stressful in my head than it is in reality. The beacon broke in our attempt to use it, so of course we get to play cable repair guy now that the IMC have noticed that a giant satellite is signaling their enemy. Before we go on, let's talk Operation Fracture though, as BT brings it up in passing. Operation Fracture is essentially an event that defined Jack Cooper, with it being one of his earliest missions, where he suffered memory loss as a result to the events that happened there. It was a battle that was scuffed by the militia with many losses, with them just carrying this out in an attempt to resupply. Short version, it's a militia L with a few positive asterisks for them. Now, an interesting thing to note is some people quote this memory loss as the idea of Jack Cooper being a sleeper agent for the IMC, but he lost his memory, but now he's just for the militia. So the idea is, Jack Cooper would sneak into the militia when he himself is an experienced pilot, lose his memory, and then fight for the militia, going completely against the IMC, not knowing he was initially for their side, and that's how he's so naturally talented at both killing people and with piloting Titans. I love this theory. I think it's incredibly interesting, and I really wanted to mention it in the prior section, but I also didn't want to spoil this part since it was in this area. I think it's a really cool idea, but I also think Jack Cooper suffering memory loss is just so vague, you can make any theory really work with it, which is kind of a shame, but I do like the idea of Jack Cooper being a sleeper agent who changed sides because he never recalled his memories. But with that conversation out of the way, BT throws Cooper over, and it's time for us to do repairs. We began hearing radio intel involving Richter. He was the guy who was taking people's ears off of those dead guys around us at the start of the game, Blood Meridian style. I don't like Richter from both a narrative standpoint and as a person, but I'm of the opinion he'd scalp us too, just because he could. He's kind of based on Arnold Schwarzenegger, a guy who I believe would not scalp people, but it's really just the voices and phrase. He's more of a Hans and Franz type of guy. The fur coat he's rocking is pretty cool, but unfortunately he falls into the generic pilot pipeline for me. The best thing about this level is that you can use the arc tool to instantly activate stalkers that are yet to be activated so that they'll fight for you. It doesn't hurt that this level is structured in a way that I think it's significantly easier to speed through as opposed to some of the other ones, and data knifing some of the robots here is immensely satisfying as well. I think they might be simulacrums here, but it really depends on the footage. I couldn't tell you whether it's a simulacrum versus a stalker, just because I have some racial bias, I suppose, with those two groups. Now, there's not much room for cover, but I like that the level has you move for these encounters, since the only other option is stand and be gunned down. That and gun options aren't plentiful or as easy to pick up with some of the other levels, so I found myself getting creative with what I could immediately find to get through most of the squads. With the IMC sending in guys to hunt Jack Cooper, I wish we got to see more enemies with powers. In the multiplayer, you have a ton to choose from, like the grapple hook, a hologram, a cloak. Well, the cloak is in the campaign, but There's a bunch more, and the point is that there's a lot of variety with pilots and their different tactics. I'm not saying pilots should become a regular enemy, though as said, I do think the game would be vastly improved if that were the case. I'm just saying that having enemies with unique abilities in combat outside of the shield that some of the grunts have would have been good for the overall campaign, as opposed to lots of, you sit in the crane, and you move the wall so that you can wall run on it. I also found out during this section you can use the arc tool on the stalkers, which is a nice touch. Like, I had no idea you could stun them utilizing it. And it's a nice attention to detail, calling back to how the tool is used to interface with different systems. We arrive at the uplink module and wander around cluelessly until I realize this is another section of moving the cranes as opposed to doing anything else. Once this is done, Richter sends in the Clown Brigade, and the one Reaper he sends in for this section really messes me up. I'm not sure if it's the level's geometry or something else outside of it, but something about the way he runs around this empty construction site just lets him sneak past all of the military mindset I built so far in the campaign. We smack the last grunt and pull out the uplink module to take back to the base. Richter's plan to take out the Vanguard class Titan in the meantime is sending in a bunch of anti-Titan units while we're coming back from the satellite dish. I think so far Ash had the best plan, with just hijacking BT like he's a teddy bear. We arrive back with BT, and now it's time, after killing a few dudes, to go kill some time by putting the uplink in the working beacon. While we're having fun, Sloan lets Blisk know that Kane and Ash have been murked. Blisk calls us out for stalking his podcast, but it doesn't really matter since we've already figured out everything from Anderson's logs. We swap out the batteries in our PS5, and we're lucky enough BT stopped us from becoming my phone on the bathroom floor. Now that everything is set for communications, we just have to stop the IMC onslaught. Wave 1 is Reaper City, but we've had enough practice with them for them to no longer be an issue. The Titans Richter sends for Wave 2 do a great job of utilizing the environment as cover, where the AI just really likes standing behind the rocks on the field. Richter spits some of the lyrics from Ed's theme from Street Fighter 6 at us, and we face off with his Tone Titan. Tone is a Titan I've always struggled to play and utilize efficiently, and Richter has the worst Titan I think for this arena, solely because there's so much cover to hide behind to avoid his attacks. We only managed to kill him because he decided to charge us while in execution range though. We chill out with the boys to watch the beacon actually work this time, and luckily the militia has not been wiped out yet, which means we're back in business. We meet up with Sarah Briggs, leader of the militia resistance, who hears our story. Now, in this scene, Sarah is all too happy to move BT away from Jack Cooper, even after we've survived 4 death traps together with BT, which I think is a testament to how infantile some of the militia's leadership and inner structure can be to not recognize the accomplishments and gifted pilot ability of a rifleman. Luckily, we don't have to get in a verbal debate with Sarah about this. BT makes the request for us. Now, it's time to gear up for the team-up final showdown. Due to us scanning the Ark back in time, the militia is now able to track it down to an IMC base. With no Ark in the IMC's hands, there's no power to the fold weapon, thus taking away their weapon of mass destruction and turning it into the world's largest paperweight. Get ready, ladies and gentlemen, because we're dropping back when Respawn knew how to make dropping into a mission not about picking up colorful loot standing into a circle. I was going to ask in this section, what is even the point of taking trophies in a land war? More specifically, why does Richter even do it at the beginning? But I did a bit of history reading, and it turns out throughout history, no matter the war, desecration of human remains is quite common. There was a story I read about a woman thanking her husband for sending her the skull of a Japanese man he killed, which I think is just crazy. I can't even fathom shipping that to your loved ones, let alone taking it in the first place. So with war, it's just something people always do that has been disavowed by governments. So I sincerely doubt the IMC would support Richter taking this stuff in the first place, but I don't even really know what to think of why he took them in the first place. There's just not that much he gains out of it. I mean, it's not really that big of a trophy to brag about when you don't do your fighting, man. You hide in a giant metal dude to do it for you. I have no idea why he was taking them off to show them off, because he doesn't really have much character outside of like Hans and Franz, I'm gonna pump you up with his heavy accent. it's just such a caricature. He's just so goofy, I can't even take him seriously. I don't know what the writers were really thinking for his characterization, but him in the intro with just cutting people's ears off versus him during the fight and the area where he's just being goofy guy, I don't see any connection. I guess it's just something that fell through in the development process.
Listen up. The IMC have developed a fold weapon. It has the power to destroy entire worlds, but without its power source, the Ark, it is inoperable. Your mission is to capture the Ark before it can leave the airbase. Marauder Corps, weapons hot! Stand by for Titanfall! Get to cover, pilot. We're taking down that wall. Unless we take
Finally, meeting the militia, we get to take the fight to the IMC firsthand and lay siege to capture the Ark from an airbase, awaiting to be transported to the fold weapon. And now it's time to lay siege to the Air Force Base. This is the battle that generations will study in school, with multiple movie adaptations, along with middle-aged men collecting miniatures to create replicas of the battlefield. The boots Cooper wears in this mission, that never touch anything outside of the pedals in BT, could sell for millions. This fight is turbulent, and with Sarah constantly spouting battle tactics, I kept thinking we had very little time to reach the Ark, even though the timeline on this mission is infinite. There's no actual rush to do anything. The mass amount of IMC Titans, though, leave no room for lone wolf plays. Mainly due to their numbers, they can quickly surround BT. What I find interesting about this battle is that Blisk didn't see reason to send any of the Apex Predator mercenaries out on the defense to bolster any of the IMC pilots against the militia onslaught. We have the advantage of dropping in immediately when the IMC would have no way of knowing that BT and I had scanned the Ark back in time when it erupted in the past. So I understand the lack of reinforcements present at the base, and they're really trying with everything they have here for the defense. In addition, considering the cost of one Titan from a military perspective, and how much we reduced to recyclable scrap metal during this mission, I can see why they chose not to put even more funding towards the defense of the Ark. Considering any normal engagements, this would be more than an adequate defense. The tactics of the IMC pilots here are sloppy though, revolving only around their mass numbers as opposed to having any internal defenses outside of the missiles on the wall. Though, I guess you could summarize that as how they handle their entire campaign. I have a theory that some of these enemy Titans are automated as well, considering that normally the IMC pilots are all very taunting in their dialogue. We only ever hear a few on and off comments throughout the mission, though I'm open to the idea it's because they didn't want the player to hear a bunch of get good comments from 50 Titans in the span of 10 minutes. And I've also been playing the campaign for a while at this point, so they may have just been blending together for me. This is the only part of the game where you get to have this many AI companions, and I'm honestly bummed out there's not more set pieces like this in the game. The soundtrack, the map, the animations on both our teammates and on the enemy. It's all perfect for a final showdown to stop the Ark from reaching enemy hands. As we close in on the Draconis, one single Scorch Titan repeatedly kicked my ass. I view this as the Kane rematch in my head, but unfortunately earlier in the campaign, Sloan confirmed Kane's death with Blisk. No joke though, this random Scorch Titan killed me 3 times back to back until I hid behind some flame-resistant crates left on the loading dock. As Sarah Briggs and I knock out the final 2 Titans, we finally come across the Draconis. We get to see Sloan, the Apex Predator, who opted to not play a role in the Trial of Fire, and instead chose to monitor 2 grunts dragging the Ark onto their carrier, and the final battle here turns from a race against time to a Mission Impossible shutdown event, where they're going to take the fight to the air to stop the Draconis before it can reach the fold weapon. So despite how perfectly executed the militia's attack was on this base, they still had plenty of time to successfully move the Ark from one location to another.
the Draconis. All ships
Despite having significantly less allies than the previous mission, we're treated to working with the infamous pilot team, the SITS-4, which is essentially just a mercenary team of freelance pilots similar to that of the Apex Predators. The only difference being that instead of doing this for profit, they instead focus on operating within their code of working for the expansion of freedom. That doesn't always equal the highest bidder. Their logo actually went through quite a few designs, ranging from SITS to 9999. It's interesting that they focus so much on this faction when they got such a small role in the story, since they're limited to this mission alone. The mission initially seems pretty slow considering we're just watching a flight battle until we run into the age-old archetype of the professional killer.
Visual clear. I've got good tone. I got you, kid. Brace yourself.
Parker, nice of you to show up.
You're welcome.
With a ludicrously close call, we strap up to secure some of the ships. This is a test of all of the abilities we've acquired over the campaign with enclosed spaces, minus movement, since the ship doesn't do a great job of facilitating parkour unless you're some kind of pilot with like hours worth of playtime. I found myself dying here more than any other mission in the game, but I think I was just eager since looking over the footage, almost all of my deaths are from me jumping in the center of the room and then being shot by literally everybody on board. The nice thing about being on a carrier armed for warfare is there's enough military-grade weapons for an entire battalion. So when stopping to actually work through the level at a better pace, I can just power through with all of the weaponry at my disposal. The campaign also didn't create enough human types for this section to be as well made as the other levels in the campaign, considering it's only grunts and stalkers throughout this mission. We meet up with the SITS-4, and this is the one and only time Cooper cooperates with a pilot who isn't phased into the ceiling or on the verge of death. Not counting the wombats. I wish I could tell you how the SITS-4 actually fights, considering they're pilots. But with me doing so much spastic shooting in the footage, it looks like they're not any different from the regular soldiers, besides they look a lot cooler. We reach the Malta's bridge where we pull some Rainbow Sits breaking and entering. We data knife the ship to catch up with the Draconis, and what's funny here is that when I first played the game back when Titanfall had came out, I couldn't figure out how to fly the ship to the Draconis at all. I was horrible at it, even though this section has the SITS-4 backseat driving you the entire time, shouting at you, telling you where to go. Next up, Voodoo 1 appears, and we meet the best pilot in the game, Viper. Just like Ash, who actually lived the entire time and was brought back to be a Battle Royale character, Viper technically kind of lives on as well. To bring it back to Viper, he's unique in the fact that his Titan isn't factory issue like every other Titan in the entire game. It's customly modified to allow for his North Star to be more focused on missiles and flight. He comes from humble beginnings as a pilot turned farmer, and after his daughter ran around in the North Star one time, he decided to save her and then leave home with his North Star to join in on the Frontier War. His boss fight is fantastic considering he acts different than any other Titan we've fought so far, considering the modifications he has in place, though I find it weird he brings 2 Titans with him for the start of the fight, since he gives more lone wolf energy to me than the other Apex Predators. He's serious, by the book, and by far the most competent pilot in the game. Without taking full advantage of the uneven hull of the ship, you can consider yourself scrap metal as soon as he launches his missile salvo. He also adds characterization to the Apex Predator group considering he has a real military attitude, as opposed to yelling about drugs, or Hans and Franz, or robots role-playing as sadists. He's one of 3 members of the mercenary group who has behavior appropriate for the setting. With his death, BT reaches out.
Adjusting for wind resistance. Calculating.
You okay?
Left arm severed. However, I am still operational. This ship is rapidly losing altitude. It is up to us, Cooper. Down here.
Now moving on from Viper's death, for the first time BT is faced with his own mortality. Since prior to this event, BT hasn't suffered any major harm or had the need for any repairs due to his extreme durability.
I cannot reach the Ark. Cooper, I need your help. Quickly, we need to get off the ship. We are running out of time. This way, Cooper.
What are you doing?
Protocol 3.
Get the Ark out of here!
Negative. We are trapped. I will not lose another pilot. Brace for impact.
Blisk, your problems are not my concern. Once you have delivered the Ark as per your contract, your payment will be transferred by the IMC.
Just have my money ready. I'll get you your precious cargo, you useless naff. Oi, Titan! You're gonna open up and give me what I want.
Voice command. Not recognized.
Let me just rip it out of him.
Can't risk it. The Ark's unstable.
Listen, hero. You have what's mine, and I want it back. Go on. Tell your Titan to open up.
Still trying to be a hero, eh? I have a lot of dosh riding on this contract, my friend. So tell your Titan, if he doesn't open up, I will shoot you in the head.
Pilot in jeopardy. Ocular systems. Marginal. Cannot visually acquire pilot.
Stand him up. You see him now? Right here, right here. Yeah? You see him now?
Functions. Compromised by severe crash damage.
I don't care how broken you are. I know deep down, some things still work in there. Now open up. I'm going to shoot your pilot in the head. You still remember numbers, don't you? I'm going to count to 3.
1, 2, 3. Nah, that wasn't so hard, was it?
That's the problem with teams. If you don't win together, you die together. Watch out! Take it out!
Nice try, love. Say goodnight.
Oi! Get the Ark out of here! We're running out of time!
Cooper. Over here. Cooper. I can no longer uphold the mission. But you still can. Take the seer kit. It is your best chance for survival.
In the name of upholding the mission, we're left with one opportunity. Inside BT's face is a smart pistol and a data knife, along with BT's core containing his AI. The smart pistol is unique in that it's essentially the strongest weapon a pilot can use in an emergency situation or in most situations. It automatically locks and shoots the critical weak points of any enemy within its range. What's interesting is that if you remember at the start of the game, Captain Lastimosa loaded these supplies into BT. So in a way, he not only saved us once in the beginning, but twice at the end. As we step out into the dust, we call in the final militia Titanfall of the Battle of Typhon.
Cooper, call your Titan when ready. Stand by for Titanfall.
Hello, Jack.
This is the one and only time in the campaign I use a different build than the standard expedition for role-playing
Over
reasons.
25,000, actually. BT-7274 online and ready for combat.
BT is now outfitted with the Legion Titan model, which gives him a gigantic Gatling gun, allowing for extremely high damage across any range. For the final charge on the fold weapon, we're on our own, but for most of the game and the best missions of the game, Jack and BT were on their own. The defenses of the fold weapon seem much smaller in scale than that of the Ark at the Air Force Base, though part of that makes me wonder whether this was ever planned to form a military installation last stand for defense, since the only reason this project got found was due to the time travel effects present in the areas the Ark has touched. Now, the Legion Titan is special, because I remember struggling very much to deal with this Titan in the online multiplayer, so it's rather freeing for me to revisit it here. As the fold weapon activates, we come across the villain.
You have your money, Blisk. Now go. My forces will take over from here.
About time they do something. I think our militia pilot's trying to be a hero. He's all yours. Keep the salvage.
Who said anything about salvage? I'll do this one for free.
You know what I see when I look at you? A pile of easy money.
Sloane, while given little screen time, is an interesting mercenary that I wish got more of a focus through the overarching campaign. She largely spends her time with Blisk, though I think she's more interesting than Blisk for her cutthroat nature, and she utilizes all the enemy tactics we've seen in the campaign. It's a very close fight, but it also felt much shorter than the other ones, though I attribute that to how much damage the Legion build can dish out. Ironically enough, we execute her similar to how she executed BT.
Fold weapon priming sequence complete. Deploying the Ark.
Cooper, BT, do you read?
Cooper, the injector backblast has overloaded my critical internal systems. Attempting to restore ocular systems.
We fired everything at the fold weapon. No one left.
Ocular systems restored. My analysis is throw warning. Hostile Titan detected.
It's your lucky day, hero. I'm not going to kill you. I don't work for free. But you don't get to kill me either. Yeah, you earned this, eh?
It's interesting that Blisk is impressed enough with our performance to provide us a contract card with the Apex Predators. I believe this was retconned to be the Apex Legends Battle Royale or Ape Sets Royale, depending on where you're from. But genuinely, I think it makes much more narrative sense for him to try to recruit the soldier that's given him so much trouble throughout the campaign, as opposed to invite him to a game show.
Cooper, I require require your assistance. My auto-navigation systems are offline. Get me into that injector assembly. We must do this together.
Boost the signal! BT, Cooper, our ground teams can't make it there in time. You've got to find a way to destroy the fold weapon from the inside. There's no other way.
Commander Briggs, I believe I have a solution. In its exposed state, my reactor core may be able to destabilize the arc at the center of the fold weapon.
What are you saying?
We can blow it up. I'm sending you coordinates for a dropship rendezvous.
Coordinates received. We'll be there, but I don't see how you can.
Trust me, I have done the math.
I sure as hell hope so. We're on our way. Good luck, both of you. Briggs out.
Don't worry, BT. I'm not going anywhere.
Copy that, pilot. Protocol 3. Protect the pilot.
BT, what are you doing?
Trust me.
BT!
Cooper, we just lost BT signal. We're almost there. Cooper, I'm marking your HUD with the coordinates.
This begins the final pilot's gauntlet of the campaign. As Typhon is decimated and the Ark is being stabilized through BT's power core, the only thing Cooper can do is run aimlessly as the world falls apart around him. You could make an argument for how everything fits in a way to make a specific path for him being silly and immersion breaking, but honestly, I attribute this to BT doing his math in his final moments.
Come on, pilot! Parker, get us out of here!
Pilot Cooper. A lot of people owe their lives to you. And to BT. Barker, set a course for Harmony. Take us home.
You got it.
Ninth Fleet, this is Harmony Command. Good to have you back. Welcome home.
The destruction of Typhon saved the planet Harmony. The militia calls this planet their headquarters. But millions of others call it home. Commander Briggs says I'll be inducted into the Marauder Corps and assigned a new Titan. After the techs wipe what's left of my neural link with BT. I don't know what that'll feel like, to get assigned a new Titan. I kinda like the old one.
Great job on Typhon. To all of you.
This is Pilot Jack Cooper, signing off.
And that's it. That's how it ends. It feels weird looking back on everything with how sprawling the first half of the campaign felt, while with the second half, it just feels so laser focused in its pursuit of the Ark. I honestly always feel a little emotional when BT makes the decision to throw Jack a final time so that he can escape to safety, due to his prime directives being to protect the pilot and to not lose another one. It's a beautiful campaign. Even with the flaws it has, it's still better than most of the shooters I've ever played. The only crime it commits is that, at times, it's uninspired, or it's not more expansive mechanic-wise because it's all so perfectly polished and self-contained. The characterization of Cooper and BT is wonderful, and it works well with carrying the campaign with their dynamic and how you work in gameplay so much together. Unfortunately, none of the other characters are particularly interesting in the long term. Most of them end up being their own factions in the multiplayer, and the rest of the world is delegated to being one big Easter egg for Apex Legends. I mean, Viper's daughter is even in Apex Legends, using remnants of his North Star as a mech suit, though how that makes sense from a lore standpoint on how they'd get that back is an entirely different mess. It makes me sad to see what's happened to the series. Though, I love the world of Titanfall, and I wanted to share it here since I know the game is kind of a cult classic since it didn't get the love and support during its lifespan before it got eaten up by the Battle Royale genre. It's weird how much AI has evolved in modern day. We talk about robots a lot on this channel. By the same point though, people haven't evolved to realize what works and doesn't work, both in narratives and in shooter campaigns, since most of them tend to just fall into each other or end up being some pseudo-military political backstab soap opera drama where death is more of a suggestion. There's a lot of Ouroborosing in the genre, with campaigns tending to repeat themselves or throw back things they thought would work, and Titanfall 2 just stands so well as a standalone adventure that I think anybody of any time frame can revisit it as an ageless classic. I know it's not a particularly unexpected twist having BT sacrifice himself, but it's not really about knowing it's coming. It's more so about the journey to reach that point together with him. We went from jungle to sewage plant to IKEA to time-traveling research stations to cable TV setup to storming the airbase, fighting on ships, right into the death at the congregation of everything. I tend to think of the robot from Alien Covenant. I don't want to spoil it too much, but the one who's not David, and how he said that it was all done for valor and honor. I don't think in those binary terms for BT, even though he, by definition, is nothing but ones and zeros. I just think the way that BT handles his sense of duty throughout all of the missions as your ally to guide you through your adventure with surviving is really beautiful. And I feel sad knowing that he's gone. Not just gone from the universe, but gone from Respawn. It's like they forgot about the world they built. And I love Respawn. I wish them the best in everything they do. They made the Star Wars games, the not Force Unleashed ones, the new style of Dark Souls Star Wars games. And as said, they're making Apex Legends, so they clearly have something figured out. But I still wish I could see the things I like from them. I'm not entirely sure why I made this video. I love the campaign and wanted an excuse to replay it and reminisce on it, but I'm not really sure what drawed me to show the campaign to others, to revisit all of the marketing material, all those commercials, all those gameplay compilations. There's still people making videos on the multiplayer and the different strategies. And it makes me feel so happy while at the same time feeling so sad that it never got the popularity it really deserved. But it's never too late. It still could. So yeah, I'm sad about the current state of things with Respawn no longer making what I loved, in addition to I'm taking this time to be happy and celebrate and enjoy what they did make, and I recommend you check it out too. Even though you know the story now, it's a really fun campaign from a gameplay perspective. I figured out campaigns were worth playing even after knowing stories when, as a kid, I would watch Castle Crasher videos for like hours and hours at a time, and when I finally got my first barely functioning PC, that was the first thing I bought, and I played the whole thing through keyboard because I couldn't figure out how to hook up a controller. Now, I'm grateful for Titanfall 2 and how it explores the science warfare fiction space and what it adds to it, and I'm hoping that with you watching this, you can find something else you appreciate about Titanfall or the universe or anything about it. I'd highly recommend the game, and I think there's still a few pilots on the multiplayer for you to test your skills. Outside of that, check the description for links, like, subscribe, send prayers to the poor folks playing Apex Legends. I love you all. Thank you for watching.